Hey guys, this is Roejimbo, and today I'm going to be bringing you a review and my thoughts of the Emerson Tiger. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Tiger, but the Tiger is one of the signature designs or custom, more limited production designs that Ernie used to offer, uh, but now he has actually moved into full production. And this is a really great thing for us because it means that folks like you and I can get a hold of this at production prices and production availability and get to really benefit from this cool design. This is one of a couple of other knives that were released this year, the Tactical Quakin and also the Sax. Also very cool designs. Need to get a hold of those at some point. But those were also limited production knives that are now full production. So maybe look for a review on some of those in the future at some point when I get a hold of them. But I picked up this Tiger back at the beginning of May. Local knife store, Recon One, out here in Southern California, was having a grand opening. They moved their locations, and they were doing raffle tickets for every $10 spent. So I had to take the opportunity to pick up a new knife, and so I decided on this Emerson Tiger. And one of the reasons that I wanted to pick up the Tiger was because if you guys have seen my other videos, you'll know that I got the Counter-Strike a month or two ago and was really impressed with the handle on the Counter-Strike. I really loved the way it sat in my hand, the way it deployed. Just everything about it really impressed me. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a home run going with the Tiger. Exactly the same style of handle. This is actually, I think, the CQC 13 style handle. And what's great about this handle is it really sits in your hand. Like you can get this thing almost vertical, and just the simple play of your fingers here, it kind of grabs on, locks in. So, you know, as Emerson says in their literature, this thing is meant to be. It's a purebred fighter. It is meant to just like, that's not coming out of your hand. You can do what you need to do with this knife, and it's not going to be wrestled from you. So that's a pretty important thing when it comes to any kind of a combat knife, is knife retention. A slippery grip is not a good thing if you're in a knife fight. Thankfully, none of us really get in knife fights. So and thankfully, there's a lot of other uses for this besides just knife fighting. We'll get into that in a minute. But back to kind of like the differences between these two knives. I thought this is going to be almost exactly the same thing. My experience in hand, very similar blade lengths, similar weights. But I gotta say, there's a lot of differences, and I will give the advantage to the Counter-Strike. For some reason, when this thing sits in your hand, it just, I think it has a lot to do with this thumb ramp, honestly, and the sort of the center of gravity on this blade. There's something about it being more in line and less kind of counterbalanced off to the side like this guy is, that really kind of makes this sort of more natural in my hand. The other thing is that the height of the wave and just the design of the wave in general is quite different. This rises up quicker, and it sort of forces the thumb to sit back a little further, versus this guy, it allows you to kind of come out onto it a bit more, and to me it feels a little more natural. Now that said, there's a lot of reasons why this has been my go-to knife for the past couple of months, beyond just the fact that I wanted to give you a good review on it, and beyond just the fact that this is a knife that I'm not looking to get super marked up or dinged up, or I'm I'm kind of trying to keep this a little nicer. It's a signature series. There's only 62 of them. Maybe if Emerson eventually releases a production version of it, I'll go to town with it and see what happens. Until then, I'm going to keep it a little cleaner. But one of the other things that's great about that I don't know if it's great about, I guess, yeah, it's great about this, and it's not quite as great about this, is the thumb disc placement. So, again, since this has a lower slung blade and this has a higher ridge, you get this disc up a little higher, which gives you more space to access that disc. Same thing over here, or the inverse thing over here. This thing is down lower and you have a little less space to get at that disc. And so if you're going to do the flick, you're really kind of biting into your nail as you do it. And still very doable, not a problem at all, but it scuffs up your nails slightly. I don't care. It's not a problem for me, but it's not quite as pleasant either as something like this, where you get your finger completely underneath it and it just seems to glide out. Same thing with the thumb. Now, that said, for the uses that I was using this for, I actually, I'm showing it to you with the disc right now, but I had actually taken that disc off, and I've been running it minus the thumb disc. And it's the only Emerson that I've done that with, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you why I did it. There's obviously, it's a little bit easier to get in here now because I can just use the wave as my thumb stud, as my opening mechanism. But beyond that, it also now provides a nice clean cutting path. So based off of the kinds of chores that I was doing, I was finding it a little bit easier without something here snagging. So I actually really like it this way. I think you can operate it like a front flipper. You can traditionally thumb deploy it or flick it, and it's extremely easy to do. And just adding, beyond just taking off that disc, it also opens up this area, so you really get a full finger in there. So again, Emerson, kind of bills this as like a fighter, and it definitely could be. It has the similar blade shape to the CQC-8 or the Horseman, and those guys are they have also this kind of wedge in the front and this sort of upswept blade, and that's been a common combat knife. It's seen a lot of combat use from what I hear, and a lot of people really dig it just because it's a pretty versatile blade too, which is what I've found with this. This blade shape in particular has kind of made me a believer in just a continuous belly, especially when paired up with this nice flat-topped swedge or this kind of wedge shape to the tip. I've just found a ton of usage on that, and I'll show you in just a moment. So, is it a fighter? Absolutely, it could be. Tactical scenarios, you're good to go. But beyond, let me just postulate that maybe it might be better off in a scenario something like this. This is how I've mainly used this knife. This thing has been the best food prep knife I've ever found, which is crazy because most people will tell you, oh, Emersons are weapons. These things are meant to kill people, and do grievous harm. That's why, the grind, the thick blades, the chisel edge, like, what are you gonna do with this? Well, you can do utility. You can you can open boxes. It's great for personal defense. But when it comes to food, forget about it. You're not gonna, it's not really, it'll do the job, but it won't do the job well. That's what I've kind of heard on most other knife reviews and opinions on Emersons. And I kind of wanted to challenge that because let me show you my most used kitchen knife. All right, this is my most used kitchen knife. This thing, I actually never folded open. I had it shut right now just because I didn't want to knock it over something open. But this thing just stays in my kitchen open. It's a Cold Steel Voyager, the XL, and this nice curve. I've used this thing for everything, and I found that just this edge, this nice gradual belly, is it's incredibly useful in the kitchen. It's incredibly useful with food. I use this to cut open mangoes every day, process other. I do a lot of cooking, honestly. I like to eat, and so I like knives. So cooking, eating, knives, it all works out very well. But look at the blade shape on this versus this. Let me lay those on top. Can you see that? That's like, we're talking about almost exactly the same curve. And so this ended up being a food prep knife that I was actually able to carry around, do other tasks with, as opposed to something like this, which is, it's a fun thing for the kitchen, and this full flat grind is really quite nice for, again, for food. But I kind of, again, wanted to test the this old adage that Emerson's, saber grind with the chisel edge is really not it's not a good food blade, and I've just found that to be false. Again, typically when you talk to the knife community about what's a food blade or what's a tactical blade, they're going to tell you something like your Delica is your perfect apple cutter, and the apple has become kind of the that's the thing. Like, well, you're not going to cut your apple with that. Oh, that's going to be great for, at your lunch break, popping it out, cutting up an apple or something. And I got to say, like, how do you guys cut up apples? I don't take a knife and put it against a cutting board and then wedge out apple chunks like this. That's not great. I mean, it works, but I don't usually have a cutting board, right? So it ends up being in my hand. So yeah, I can do that with this, but I do have to keep pressing in. I can't. I am using force, and I'm holding it in my hand, and to me, that's a little nerve-wracking. It's okay. I can do it. I have skill with a knife, but it's not great. And the other thing that, as far as apple processing goes, because I'm just going to use this apple as sort of a, let's use this as the playground for these blades and show you how what typically people would say is your go-to food knife is maybe not, depending on how you use it. So the other thing I do is I cut out the top and the bottom of an apple before I go eating it. So can you do that with something like this? You can, but the slicier it is, the more it's going to want to kind of run on you, all right? And in my experience, it works, but it does kind of it wants to keep going. What I've found with apples is that if you have something that's a little bit more wedgy, something a little wider, what you can do is you can drop that tip in there and just pivot. Be a little bit easier if this thing wasn't already to have a wedge taken out of it. But that pretty easily removes the top of an apple, and it would do the same thing with the bottom. And I mean, maybe I could have been a little cleaner with that Delica, but you're taking a lot more meat out. The slicier it is, the easier it is to kind of scoop out too much or slice out more than you want. Versus something like this, it isn't super slicey. It is a little bit of a wedge, but because it's a little bit of a wedge, you can kind of just rotate around and take out little divots like this. And then, so how does this cut through an apple? You'd think you'd need to use more force because it's thicker. You're gonna get halfway through and the apple's gonna give up and crack. That's what I've heard people say. Well, let me show you. This thing is great because I can just drop my weight onto that spine and now I have a slice, and I didn't have to use any kind of downward force into my hand, right? The only force that I'm doing is pulling with my thumb. And it just so happens that the thickness of the blade allows you to drop it almost all the way to the core, at which point you can just stop and this thing pops over. So for apple cutting, I know there's a lot of other things you can cut, and apples are a very unique thing. If you're cutting something in your hand and it just happens to be this shape, but that's the analogy everyone talks about. And I gotta say, this is my favorite apple cutting knife. Like, is it as clean? No, I guess it's not as, pristine of a cut. A little rougher, but I'll show you in some video that this thing can definitely cut some fine stuff, some very thin stuff, no problem whatsoever. And obviously when it comes to apples, it's my favorite knife. So let's, it's a good thing to start kind of like actually testing this, putting some of these old ideas about an Emerson being purely a weapon, put that kind of to bed. Like, it's great that it is a weapon, and should someone come barging through my, my window or something like that, or kick down my door, oh, I've got something in my hand, a little bit more capable than a Delica, So other things that I've found that this is extremely useful for. Again, you'll see in the video, but what's great about this is you can cut something, and then if you have a collection of pieces, right? You'll see this. I do this with garlic, with onions, whatever. This flat edge right here, this immediately becomes a perfect food maneuverer. And then this rocking style of cutting that one can employ really makes this thing perfect for mincing stuff up, cutting stuff up. Just a really useful blade style. There's an Italian knife called a mezzaluna, and it means mezza meaning like half, and then luna, moon. And so it's this half moon style of this gradual arc, this belly. So I've really grown to appreciate it quite a bit. So I guess I should give you some stats on this thing, beyond just telling you what it's good for and all of that. This guy clocks in at 3.5 ounces, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a really great weight. It has enough weight in the hand where it stays in my hand, but not so much weight that I don't want to throw in my pocket or something. The overall length is 9 inches, so it's a pretty good sized knife. Compare it again here to the Delica. It's quite a bit bigger than the Delica. Let's see, do I have anything else here's a XM18. So it's a little bit longer than the XM18 as well. Closed, it's coming in at 5.2 inches. So pretty sizable, but again, perfect for my hand. Like, I like a big handle. I don't know why everybody's so concerned about getting the handle down to the smallest size possible. I want it to fill my hand. I really like that. That's, for me, an important thing. The blade length is 3.8, and it's the normal 0.125 thickness on this 154 cm. And I guess let's talk about the 154 cm and just sort of the edge. And having used this hard against cutting boards, it's also great for pizza. This thing, it's the perfect pizza slicer. So you don't have to be a crazy chef with a bunch of, go nuts with garlic and spices and all kinds of crazy shit. You can just be processing your pizza, and this thing is killer. But back to the 154 cm, I've hard used this thing, and I've only stropped it once. I didn't sharpen it, anything like that. And I don't know if you can see, it definitely does have some rolls, some dings. You know, it's not a perfect keen edge anymore. That said, let's give it the old paper test. So this is um, what, almost two months later. It's no, is it? It's almost 3 months later. Almost 3 months later. Time flies when you're having fun, right? Uh, so it's hitting the little snags, right? But I mean, it is not. Okay, it could be sharper. Or it could be me. I don't know. I mean, it's a little of both. I'm not killing it on the cut test today, but, and it depends on where I hit it. There we go. If you find the sweet spot. But as far as the parts that are sharp, you can see, I mean, it's doing some fine curl type shit. I mean, it's still very sharp. I've found that it's with a little stropping, it's incredibly sharp. Of course, eventually I will take it to a diamond stone and, you know, just touch it up. But as far as like a usable blade goes, I am incredibly sort of impressed with the 154 CM. Like, that's one of these things that I kind of thought, oh, well, 154 is like, it's good, it's serviceable, it's, you know, but I've been incredibly impressed with it. Like, it has maintained its edge really well. When I did strop it, and I stropped it at least a month and a half ago maybe. So it's really doing pretty well, all things considering. And when I did strop it, this thing just like, it came back to just that scary, scary edge. And yeah, I really like it. I'm looking forward to, you know, getting it back to 100% perfect edge, but it's held up really, really well. And then the other thing too is that as you can see, I'm not like super anal about cleaning the thing up. I use this with, you know, a wide variety of different foods, fruits, veggies, acidic stuff, again, the pizza sauce, stuff like that. And really was not crazy about cleaning it up quickly afterwards. And it's, you know, I've had no rust, no kind of blemishing whatsoever. So really quite impressive as far as like the stainlessness of it as well. As far as in hand, this thing is like very maneuverable. I gotta say that, and feels good in any grip that I've employed it in. It's you know, I mean, it's not gonna be a bushcrafting blade, I don't think, but yeah, really just overall great impressions of this knife. So I'm not really sure what to say more about it. This thing is killer. I find myself grabbing it just as like my go-to knife. I feel like completely equipped to handle anything from dinner to assailants with this thing. So as far as like lockup and stuff goes, yeah, that's the other thing. You'll see in these videos, I'm like putting this thing down on garlic and pounding on the blade. So it's taken a lot of like sort of irregular use. I've muscled this thing through really heavy duty like spaghetti squash. I don't know if you've ever tried to get into one of those things. This will sort of do the food gives up eventually. I mean, once you get in there, it'll just crack open the thing. So it is kind of a little bit more of a splitter in that sense. But the point is that I've put an incredible amount of like pressure on this blade and, you know, bashed on it from many angles. Kitchen batoning, if you will. And it's really, really great. It's held up like, you know, there's no blade play. Oh, the one thing I will mention, so this was a little bit weird. You probably, I don't know if you can hear it. You hear the little squeak. There's not much of a squeak right now. You hear that? Well, that was much more noticeable when I first got it. So as you opened it, it kind of did that this sort of rusty playground carousel kind of sound, and it drove me a little crazy at first. I think at one point I did take a little bit of tape and put it on the inside of the lock bar here, inside the liner lock, and oddly enough, just that little bit of like dampening, because this is a titanium lock bar, I think that there was like a vibration running through that titanium, and it was just I don't know, it made it give off this weird kind of like groan noise. Putting a piece of tape on there did enough to dampen it where it just completely disappeared. I've since removed that and just continued to live with it as it was, and as it broke in, I hear less and less of it. Like in everyday opening and shutting, I don't hear anything. But just in the right position, if you start wiggling it, you can hear that weird whine. So anyways, if that's something that super bothers you, just know that there is a break-in period where you're going to hear that a lot. Other than that, really no complaints about it. Yeah, the Emerson Tiger. This is just a home run design. I really can't ever imagine parting with this knife. Like, this is one of those permanent collection kind of knives. I mean, of course, there's always a scenario in which you'd sell the knife, but I can't see it coming up anytime soon. So, anyways, guys, I hope you enjoy the review of the Emerson Tiger, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.